Hey, travel creators. Welcome back to another episode of the Travel Creator Podcast. I'm Laura, if you've never heard my voice before, and today I bring you our very freaking first guest episode on this show. And I have the wonderful Andrea here to talk about branding and websites and why travel creators need both. So, to give a little context before we dive in here, branding is essentially the foundation of your entire creator life. So it informs how you talk about yourself, who you talk to, your vision, your mission, your goals, all of that good stuff, so that if you need to pass off your content to somebody else, they know what the heck to do and where to start and can talk like you do. Similarly, social media, I never preach as being like the end game for travel creators, is an incredible tool, but you never own the content that you are putting out there, and websites are a great place to put that stuff. Plus, when you start to work with brands, which I'm not an expert on here, but it is a very important piece to have some type of portfolio or something you own rather than just sending them a link to your Instagram account. We're going to dive into all of that and much more in this episode.
Hello, travel creator content listeners. My name's Andrea from the Wander Working Podcast. My podcast is about exploring the intersection of travel and work, but I'm here today to talk to you more about my other set of skills, which is in branding and website creation. I always wanted to become a digital nomad, and during the pandemic when we were all locked up, I bunkered down and I learned a new skill, and I studied web design for those 2 years and was finally able to get a remote job that allowed me to travel the world. I also create content around this topic and take you with me as I am a fairly new nomad who's out and about and exploring and learning all the hard lessons of being a first-time digital nomad. But I'm here to talk to you about something I have more expertise in. Now, as I did mention before, my job is in website creation, but first off, I do want to talk about why it's so important for creators to create a brand. When we think of a brand, we usually think of two things. We think of a logo and we think of maybe colors. But a brand is so much more than that. If anything, those two bits are just what is called a visual identity. But a brand is overall what this person, thing, or idea represents, who it's speaking to, its personality, and its set of values and ideas. Now, I know that's a lot, but we're going to break it down. So a visual brand is a representation of logos, colors, typography, imagery, and overall aesthetic. Now, the brand identity is basically all of that, plus the mission, the values, the personality, and other non-visual elements. In short, the brand is the visual and the non-visual put together. All the things that you will use to communicate with your audience.
Yes. Okay. Pause. Stop. Hit that little 15-second rewind button. Do it. Do it right now and listen to the last 15 seconds of what Andrea just dropped for us. Most people, when they think about a brand, are just like, yep, I have colors and fonts and logos that I use and like, and that's awesome. That is a very important part of your visual identity, but it is not the whole dang thing. It is yes and. Okay, cool. You have your fonts and you have your logo and. We can only do so much with the logo, okay? We need to know how to talk about you. And I know this can be incredibly overwhelming if you've never worked on your brand or had someone help you do a brand identity, but Andrea's going to break it down for us, I promise.
Now, why do travel creators want a brand? I know this word gets thrown around a lot on social media and Instagram, and everybody tells you you need to have a brand or you need to make a personal brand. And I don't usually agree with when social media bandwagons and says things like this in general, but for this case, I do agree that if you do want to treat your travel creation as a potential future business, even if it's not being monetized right now, it's really important for you to create a brand, because one thing that a brand does is it creates recognition. How is an audience going to recognize you if you're one thing on Instagram, another thing on TikTok, maybe you have a podcast as well and you're completely different kind of brand style, maybe you call yourself something different, people get confused. So it's important to have a cohesive brand to tie your idea and your person to one identity across all the kinds of different platforms, and for you to create a connection with your audience, because think in their shoes. They see millions of things every single day, and how are they supposed to remember you if you're constantly changing day to day from platform to platform? Having a strong brand identity and brand message can help you connect to the audience that you want to reach, more specifically, your niche. Think about who you're speaking to. This is the very first step of the branding process, figuring out who you want to speak to. What I like to do, and this is something that's also done in businesses as well, is create a customer persona or a ideal brand persona. Think of the ideal person you're speaking to. Now think about them in more detail. Who are they? Are they male, female? What color is their hair? What's their age? What type of content do they like to consume online? And on what platforms? Think about their likes, their dislikes, how adventurous they are. Do they have kids? Are they a single family household? Think of all these things and create an imaginary person in your head that you are selling to.
You guys, I think I should just let Andrea just always come on the podcast. Okay, there are so many things to break down here, and I always try and tell people, when you are creating a piece of content, the person who is receiving that piece of content on the other end, you should have a crystal clear picture of who they are, what they look like, how old they are, what kind of flowers do they have on their table when they get home. Are they the type of person who takes their shoes off before they enter the house? Like, being incredibly obnoxious and specific is only going to help you get closer to building a bigger and badder and better audience. Now, this also, like Andrea talks about, helps us have a consistent brand identity. And oh my God, as a travel creator, there are so many places you can go. I don't need to tell you this. There are so many things, there are so many ways and directions you can go in your content, and it can be incredibly overwhelming. And I think that's why I see a lot of people get really paralyzed in creating their content, because you have so many directions you can go to. Like, it's just, there's too many things. And when you have a very clear brand identity of what kind of content you do create and who you create it for, that can help you give you some guardrails. Now, I know some people do better when they have like an open playing field. You know, they can just go out there and create as many ideas and stuff as they want. And some people do better when they have a smaller fenced-in backyard in terms of creativity. And when you have this very clear brand, when you dig deep and do the damn thing and get really specific, it can help you know which direction to go with in your content, because you already know, oh yes, I can definitely talk about this topic, but how can I narrow that down to the people in my audience / through my brand? Okay, to give you some specific advice on how to keep a consistent brand on social media, you can think about always using the same font style, always formatting your captions in a certain way, whether they're a guide, you always do it this way. This also, guys, saves you time in the long run, because if you have a destination that you want to share a guide about and you have many more destinations to share guide style content about, just use the same format. And then people get used to it over and over. For example, I've talked about MK at Your Day by MK on this podcast a lot, okay? Because her content lives rent-free in my mind, because almost every piece of content I see on her channel is her doing a coffee walk, okay? And she goes out and she goes on her little walks and she talks about literally anything, and she's holding her cup of coffee. And now I just recognize, like, when I go to her page, that's the type of content I'm going to get. So when you take a step back before you post anything on social media, think about, is this something that people in my audience would expect to see from me, or is this like really off the wall? Like, am I gonna, like, I don't know, am I gonna scare people? Are they gonna be like, whoa, I followed you for this piece of content and now I'm not getting this side of you? This also kind of dives into getting a little bit more personal in your content. So if you're a travel creator and you're just like, here are these awesome places, you should go there, that's awesome. Some people are like, okay, I had this really shitty travel day, and we all know we love those stories. So it's just up to you how like personal you want to be in your content, and you kind of need to make that decision in the forefront. I suppose I'm not opposed to like people changing, rebranding, of course. But if you are all of a sudden posting guides and then you're like doing a little sob story about your travel day, that could be jarring. Think about how that could be a little bit jarring to your audience. However, We also walk the fine line of, okay, some people really, we know what works well on social media is being personal. And so it's a fine line. Like I've talked about before, it's so hard to know how personal do I be versus how educational and informational. And I do believe there's a way to do both. And through that is having a rock solid brand. Okay, back to Andrea.
After you do that, you can then figure out their wants and how to best reach that person. When you have a cohesive idea of who you want to speak to, it's a lot easier to build your brand up from there. Because since this is the ideal person you want to talk to, well, what kind of brand would communicate well to that person? From then on, you establish your brand values, your mission, and your personality. If, for example, you're trying to reach a predominantly female Gen Z audience, you would want to adopt a brand value and brand persona that relates well with them. Now, in this example, you would probably want to pick values that are aligned with this type of audience. See what's important to them, as well as maybe adopting a more casual brand voice so that your brand personality is a match with the very casual and very dark humor type of personality that a lot of Gen Zs tend to have. You would also want to talk about things that are relatable to them and to their generation. Now, if we decide, for example, to speak to a millennial audience, that would change. Maybe would adjust our values. We would want to speak to them in a different way, and we would talk about different experiences that are more relatable to that specific audience. It's all not necessarily about age, but this is just one general factor that tends to be something you keep in mind as you establish your brand identity. The next step, and also my favorite, is getting to the visual part. This is a part where we actually create the logo. We pick the colors, we pick the typography, and we make those design choices in accordance to what our audience would like and our brand personality. We're not going to have a kooky, colorful, crazy font type of logo for a serious business that is promoting like some medical product. It just wouldn't go. So you make those design choices according to the brand values and the brand personality that's already been established. Now, those are the three main steps, but they have been generalized into quick bite-sized forms. I do want to talk about websites for a minute, because I do know that a lot of travel creators are guilty of only living on social media platforms. Now, if you're someone who does that, stop it. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that because social media is changing all the time. So unless you want to be at the mercy of the algorithm gods, I would suggest that there is another place on the internet that is owned by you, where you control the narrative and you can post your content and your information and your freebies and your stories and everything else that you can have in case one day your account gets hacked, or maybe something's wrong with your account and it gets blocked or flagged or something, because it has happened before to bigger creators than me. And Laura has other horror stories that she could probably mention on her podcast about other creators who have had their Facebook groups shut down or their accounts completely shut down for random violations that there's no justification for. And unless you're a big creator, it's really hard to get those accounts back somehow. And think about that. You put all that work into your social media accounts for your followers to just go away in just the blink of an eye. That's scary.
I am actually giddy. I am so giddy because this is one of my favorite topics known to man. Okay, have you ever seen that meme? Oh my God, I'll have to post it on my Instagram. I can't. I'm so excited. It's this mug and it's a latte and someone is pouring the latte it's just like being tipped over straight up onto a table. And in the latte, the text says, "A topic I'm interested in." And then the table, it says, "Anyone who will listen." And then That's me. That's me about this topic, because you are right, Andrea. I do have freaking horror stories about how social media can go away overnight. And I don't mean that lightly. And I'm not just saying that for jump scare material, even though it is definitely jump scare material, because it's the truth. I have seen creators who have massive YouTube channels and they're gone. YouTube channels, that's like supposed to be safe. No, apparently not anymore. I don't know. It's so wacky, and who knows where the internet is going, okay? But there are things you can do now to protect your community. And one of those is building a website, and the other is creating a newsletter. And I have all of that information about why you don't own your social media content and what you can do about it in episode 4 of the podcast. So once you're done with this, go hop on over there.
That's scary as hell. So if I were you, I would create a place online that is owned by you, i.e. a website, where all of that can live outside of your social media platform. Now, that doesn't guarantee that there will be eyes on the website all the time, but it's definitely a place where you can put a lot of the stuff that you have and build it up as you build your social media, so that in case that day ever comes, it's all somewhere else and it's all backed up and you don't lose everything. Now, in addition to that, if you're a travel creator, you ideally in the future want to start monetizing your platform if you aren't doing so already. Now, the great thing about having a website is it gives you another billboard for you to put your stuff on. And it'll appeal to certain brands or products that you want to work with and promote for those people that aren't so social media savvy. Believe me, there's a lot of businesses out there where the heads of marketing are very, very unfamiliar with social media. Maybe they got a promotion. Maybe they hired from within. They've just been in the company forever, so no one's going to remove them from their role. But that doesn't mean they're necessarily in tune with social media and digital marketing standards of nowadays. Now, if you are working with a company like that, with someone who is unfamiliar with social media, if you send them a DM, it may be quite likely that they don't respond. And you don't want to miss out on opportunities just because, that's not the way they communicate. Maybe they would offer a great deal to someone. They're just not connecting with people online in that way. Now, if you have a website, you can always present yourself in a different light, I would say. I think social media is great for being relatable and reaching an audience. But if you're reaching executives, marketing executives from big companies especially, I think having a website is a great place to showcase your professionalism and your work all in one. It is sometimes hard to be taken seriously when all your work is only online. So having a website and treating that as your portfolio to future brand deals is a great advantage. And I recommend every single travel creator creates one.
Yes. Creating a web page, it can even be a landing page. I think when people think about websites, it can be incredibly overwhelming because there's so many kind of jargon and tools and things and barriers that you have to learn. Like, do you know how to code? What about SEO? What about backlinks and all of that crap? And yes, that's important for your purposes. But if you are a travel creator whose main jam is social media, but you also know that you need a place to own your crap on the internet, then you can just create a landing page. Just create a landing page of your content so that you don't have to get into all the links and the blog and the whole no. You just need one little landing page to showcase your work and why someone would want to work with you.
Now, that being said, don't try to find my website because being that I am a website designer myself, and I know other creators will probably relate to this, it's really hard to create for yourself because I am a perfectionist. But that doesn't mean I'm not able to put out great websites for everyone else. I do that as my day job. So if you ever need website work and you're struggling with it, reach out to Laura or check out my profile. I do web work on the side as a freelancer and can definitely help you out with that. And since I am a website designer myself, I'm going to give you guys some tips for creating your website. One of the biggest flaws I see with people who create their own websites is that they don't optimize for mobile. I believe I saw this statistic a while ago, so it may not be as up to date, but about 80% of web traffic is all through mobile. People are searching the internet mostly on their devices now. And if you don't have a website that's optimized for mobile, your beautifully crafted website that looks great on a computer screen may look like garbage when someone pulls it up on their phone or iPad. Now, there is no ideal screen size to optimize for because screen size are all varying slightly. What we want to do is create a website that is responsive, meaning that it'll respond well in any kind of screen size. Now, that does mean you might have to forgo some design choices because they may not respond well on all display sizes. But we do have a neat little thing called breakpoints, which is where we tell our websites at this specific screen size, switch the design to look like this to something else. And it's almost an alternative so that your website responds well on a smaller screen. Maybe it'll stack 2 columns in one when you're scrolling on a phone, but it'll have those columns side to side when you have them on a wider screen. Now, that's just a short and quick, easy example. We can definitely go more into it, but because this is an audio-only podcast, those are very visual elements to explain. But these also are the most common mistakes I see for people trying to build their own websites. That being said, there is a ton of website creating platforms, Wix and Squarespace being some of the most popular ones. Webflow for people who are maybe a little bit more tech savvy, and then WordPress as well. Now, out of all of those, I heavily recommend WordPress. If you know how to use it, that is great. If it's a little over your head, I would say definitely reach out to a freelancer to take care of that for you and learn at least the basic management stuff on your own so you can manage your own website. The reason I don't advocate for Wix and Squarespace is just because they are platforms that are very template based, meaning your website could end up looking like someone else's website very easily. But aside from that, it's also a very bloated platform. Now, for those who aren't web designers or developers, you may think, what the heck does that mean? It just means that it uses a lot of code, and a lot of code means a lot of processing time. And unless you have very expensive hosting, I would not recommend that because lowering page speeds also is not great for your SEO, which I know is a big power phrase that's been thrown around to explain so many things online. But basically, SEO is search engine optimization, and it means how much Daddy Google likes you and wants to put you on the first page. A lot of these technical aspects play into SEO. So I would recommend a platform that is not as bloated, meaning WordPress, where you can build and customize as you need. And it's so great because if you do have products that you end up wanting to sell, whether they be digital or physical products like merch, that is something you can then add onto WordPress. I know you can do that on Wix as well, but I have my reasons for not liking it. I could explain them all to you in this podcast, but then we would be here for 1 hour. And Laura told me I could only rant for about 30 minutes, so I will leave that at that.
I will have Andrea back to rant much more, and maybe we can dive even deeper into websites if you think that's going to be helpful. If you want to hear more from Andrea, slide on over to my Instagram, okay? And message me websites, and you can find me at Travel Content Writing. Yeah, that's my handle. Let me know. Feel free to send me a DM on Instagram if you want to learn more about websites for travel creators, and maybe we can dive deep with Andrea on how to actually set that up. Maybe that would even be a good free little workshop. I don't know. Let me know what you want. Anyway, I think the basis here of what we're getting is that brand is all about being consistent and repeating. So how does this correlate with all of the things that I preach about all the time? For example, your brand is super easy to carry over into newsletters. One, because there's a lot less moving parts, literally. One, there's not a ton of video you're going to be popping into your newsletters unless you're linking to some other video that you've created. So it's really easy to create a branded template. Either in whatever your email software that you use, you can create a branded template in there that just fills it all out and you press send. Please Make sure it looks nice. Okay, that's something I can help you do. I can help you do that if you're not sure about how to execute your visual brand, but you have like a vision in your mind. Similarly, on social media, make sure your brand is consistent. Like I mentioned before, you can do this visually using the same caption style, using the same editing techniques, but you can also use this in the same way that you talk to your audience, meaning you're not going to post about budget travel in one post and then the next day post about luxury travel destinations. Do you see how that's confusing to your audience? Because they're like, hey, I showed up to learn how to backpack Europe and now I'm getting luxury resorts in the Caribbean. The math is not mathing here. And to help you make sure you're never tempted to go a little haywire in talking about budget travel to then luxury travel in 1 week is by niching down. And another part of that, which I don't touch on a lot, is that half of niching down is having a brand foundation. Because then you know who you're talking to and who you feel best talking to. So, someone who has an excellent Instagram and podcast that has a cohesive brand is our one and only Andrea here.
Moving forward, I do want to talk about blending your social media platforms with your websites to work cohesively. Now that you have your brand, now that you've branded yourself on social media, how does that translate into your website? You want to make sure everything's cohesive. Now, what I do before I start putting my logo everywhere and designing everything and going crazy on Canva and whatnot, I create a visual identity guide. Because once I have my brand together, it is very easy to create my visual identity guide, which is basically going to be your logo in different formats, whether it be your logo's favicon, your logo in a horizontal way, your logo in a stacked way, because you do want to have different version of your logo for different things. You got to think big. Think about future applications. Maybe right now you just have your logo on your Instagram profile, but what if in the future you want to sell merch? What if in the future you want to put that on a podcast cover? Or if you want to put that on some pencils or hats or canvas bags, you want to make sure that that logo is the same, but it's also versatile. So you have different renditions of that logo for different applications. In this guide, that's one of the first things you want to put on there. Second thing is you're going to have your brand colors. Now you're going to have maybe 3 to 4 primary colors, but I would not go more than that. And maybe a couple complementary ones. But those are the colors that are going to represent your brand. Usually they're incorporated in your logo somehow, but if they are not, then they are the colors that you're going to use for everything, because establishing brand identity is all about repeating elements. So you want to use these repeating colors everywhere. So you're going to have those colors, and in addition, you're going to have your typography. This is that typography that you want to use for all your flyers, all your Instagram posts, all the titles on your website. Make sure that it follows this typography guide. Now, I usually have 2 to 3 styles, maybe 2 different styles for big title, subtitle, and then maybe one more simpler style for the paragraphs and the captions and things like that. And what you're going to want to do is make sure that those fonts are applicable across all platforms. I know there's not much options when you're on social media, but at least for your website, you want to make sure that it's using the same fonts, the same colors, the same logo. And if you are on social media, maybe you don't have control over the fonts, but on the visuals that you put out, anything that has text on it, make sure it follows those typography guides. Make sure the colors are cohesive with the colors on your branding guide. And I get very nitpicky about this. I write down the color codes and I make sure that it's the exact right shade by using the same color code or hex code. It's that 6-figure code that you'll see on the color wheel. And we can get quite technical because there's different color wheels depending on whether it's on digital, whether it's on print. So you want to make sure you have the equivalent of your brand colors in both the RGB color wheel and the CMYK color wheel. It is important to have that attention to detail when creating a brand, because I promise you, brands will notice when someone has a very put together, cohesive brand identity, and that will be a strong indicator to them that you are someone who is professional, who has an eye for design, and knows how to cater to the right audience. In addition to creating more brand and sponsorship opportunities, I also think that this is great for building recognition among your audience. A lot of people need to see things at least 7 times before they remember what it is. So seeing the same brand, the same colors, the same repetitive elements, and the same messaging across your feed is going to put you apart from everybody else who's posting on Instagram very randomly to the person that they think of for their niche topic.
Just please do anything you can to avoid Comic Sans, okay? Oh, please. But really what Andrea's getting at here is that your brand has to be consistent. Brands see brands. So if you want to book with a brand, you have to have a brand. When you are creating your media kit or whatever the heck to send to brands, they're going to be looking for, is the target audience that you create content for aligned with their target audience? And if you're just like, I'm just a travel creator, I just post about travel, that is awesome and continue to do that. But they're going to be very specific and nitpicky in understanding who specifically you talk to. And if there's a mismatch there, if those two doesn't align, meaning their audience and your actual audience, and if you can't clearly describe that to them, then unfortunately they're probably not going to move forward with a partnership. And I know there's a lot of information in this episode. There's so much information, and just get Andrea to do it. No more in 2024 or whenever you're listening to this are we piecemealing our travel creator journeys. We're just doing the right thing and we're doing it well, and I hope this podcast can be a resource for you. If you take anything away from this, know that you should sit down, figure out who you're talking to, and do it consistently. And someone who shows up with a consistent brand every single time on Instagram and on her podcast is Andrea herself.
For example, for me, it's digital nomads. And I'm more than anything specifically reaching out to female digital nomads who are starting out and maybe afraid to travel solo. And I have niched my content down to them because that was me 2 years ago. I was scared to travel on my own, and I wanted to reach that specific audience. So I've created my messaging around them. I've created my brand identity around them. And all my posts are with them in mind. Now, if that sounds like you, I highly encourage you to check me out on Instagram under the handle wanderworking without the E, and check out my podcast, the Wanderworking Podcast, on everywhere you get podcasts. I talk about mostly travel-related content in terms of what it is to find work and travel solo and all of that good stuff. But if you do want to reach out to me to talk about website design, brand identity design, like I said, feel free to reach out and DM me on Instagram. I'm pretty responsive to my DMs. And I can always help you out because I do freelance work in branding. I recently redesigned a friend's brand who's also a podcaster, redesigned her logo, her podcast cover, made her a branding identity guide, and now she's going forward with her social media presence, having a more cohesive look, because she said her brand was all over the place. She was changing her mind on the things she likes, the design she likes, colors she liked from every single day of the week. And she said, it looks like someone just threw up on my feed because I can't decide what I am. That to me is what branding is all about. And I helped her out and redesigned her whole identity. And now she's posting more cohesively. And I feel like it looks great and she's getting a lot more responses. She seems to be growing. So if that doesn't tell you something that you should get a brand design and also a website, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I am more than happy to help. Last and final shout out, I want to shout out Laura for giving me a chance to come and speak on her platform. Me and her have geeked out about this topic so much offline. And I also recorded a podcast episode with her, which will be coming out soon. So definitely check out my podcast if you want to hear more of Laura. We have a pretty good episode coming out soon in April.
Okay, creator friends, we did it! We now know more about branding, and I know this could be a lot of information you've just intaken into your ears. And if you have questions about branding, ask Andrea. Please ask her. She is so funny, it's ridiculous, and I'm so excited to be a guest on her show. And by the time that episode is out, I will have it linked in the show notes here, so if you don't see it when you click down there, you will soon. Thank you, Andrea, for coming out here to drop some knowledge. I feel like I learned a lot, honestly, about visual branding and just how much of a badass designer you are. So thank you so much. Happy creating, friends, and I'll see you next week.